Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to this session of Kaizen Central, and very much appreciate seeing you all here today, and a warm welcome. Just let you get all your videos on. And I believe that we have some congratulations to offer Richard Hagan at Crystal Doors. Richard, I don't know if you can hear me as you're there. He is. I believe you just won a Queen's Award.
We have for sustainability, and there's only 17 that have been announced this year. So it is absolutely incredible. After collecting 6 awards in the last 12 months, to be able to then get the Queen's Award on top of that really does deliver brand value, and it puts that UK manufacturers do lead the world still. Absolutely, and you know the SMEs are capable, and then people like Airbus that are on here. You know, we are world class, and we can deliver. All we need is better networking together, which is what you're doing, Nick. You're doing an absolutely fantastic job. More importantly, please do drive on with the virtual summit. For the next following 7 weeks, I'm working with Rochdale Sixth Form College, delivering a virtual summit to 214 students.
Oh.
So it is incredible that we can adapt, we can sort of deliver something better, even in a crisis.
Well, quite so. And Alison in Georgia, I'm sure you are world class as well. Do not do not take everything that Mr. Hagan says completely literally.
No, this is about UK. I am just an innocent bystander hoping to steal some of your ideas. This is espionage.
And a very overt form it is as well. Well done. Okay. Well, listen, as I said in my email this morning, I'm very grateful for the way that this community acts as a kind of hive mind, a sort of 24/7 hive mind. And when it works for me, I'm even more grateful because Graham, in correcting my interpretation of what a BHAG is, things fall into place, and I begin to understand a lot more when I get gentle corrections and suggestions, and that helped me a lot in pulling together the version I sent to you today. And I'm very excited by the thought that we can make a difference if, as Richard just said, we all work. And we've all got day jobs as well, so I'm not suggesting we give up everything to do this, but we act in our own way like a band of subversive revolutionaries. We don't have to throw Molotov cocktails. We can just throw a lot of very interesting data, stories, experiences, and try and expose them to that wider audience. And that's very much, as you know, what we're about. But then we also have to find ways to make it stick and to make any effort we put into it actually have some kind of traction. And that's why I was really grateful to John Hardwick when he offered to lead tonight, to suggest ways in which we might not necessarily formalize everything. The goal is not necessarily to find ways right here and right now to storm the barricades, but just to find some mindsets that will help us actually achieve the kind of goal, the BHAG, that we're all looking for. Well, I'm looking for, and I'm grateful to you for coming along for the ride. John, may I stop whittering and may I pass over to you, please, and take over the screen and the session. Thanks. It'll only be a few minutes. The idea is not for John to be up for all 60 minutes, but he's here to plant thoughts and for us to respond. So take it away.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, this is not in any way about formalizing. I'm actually a big fan of emergent change, but even emergent change needs a bit of a sense of purpose. So yeah, I suggested to Nick that there was a video that might be worth us all looking at for 2 or 3 minutes that poses some interesting questions and certainly got me thinking. And yeah, I don't have any of the answers. What I'm probably doing is throwing a few questions on the table for us all to think about. Yeah, it's all about what we're trying to do and how we might go about doing it. So let me just bring up the screen share. Can everybody see that? Yeah. This is actually just a 3-minute video about Malcolm Gladwell and the tipping point. So I'll start it.
3 Rules of Epidemics by Malcolm Gladwell. Why do some ideas, behaviors, or products start epidemics while others don't? This is what Malcolm Gladwell, a Canadian journalist, author, and public figure, talks about specifically in his famous book, The Tipping Point. He sheds light on the 3 rules of epidemics that can help you create your own tipping point. So, without further ado, let's dive in to find out what these 3 rules of epidemics really are. The 3 rules of epidemics. These 3 rules of epidemics play a significant role in determining whether something tips and spreads like wildfire. So, whether you are an educator, marketer, social worker, an entrepreneur, or someone looking to make an impact, these 3 rules will help you understand how far your campaign succeeds. 1. Law of the few. It has always been like this, but particularly in this digital era, a tiny percentage of people, such as connectors, mavens, and salesmen, are responsible for building huge momentum because of their influence. Such a group of people single-handedly creates many trends around us today. For those who don't know, Maven is an expert who has extensive knowledge and understanding of his subject and is always willing to pass on to his followers. Connector is someone who knows almost everyone and connects people across different industries and communities. Salesman. Such a person is charismatic and has the ability to influence others' buying decisions with effective communication skills. 2. The stickiness factor. Were you or your children ever hooked on Sesame Street or Blue's Clues? Do you know why? Because the messages envisioned in these shows are sticky. They grab your attention right away, and you just can't get them out of your head. Similarly, you can add stickiness to your message by including interesting stories, audience participation, and repetition. Always remember that success often hinges on small details rather than major changes. Therefore, ask yourself, does your message have the power to influence? If not, then find the right stickiness factor for your audience. 3. The power of context. To explain this rule in a simple manner, let's use broken window theory as an example. According to the theory, broken windows in a neighborhood lead to higher violent crime rates. But based on the power of context, the crime rate can be reduced by fixing the windows rather than arresting people for crime. Just like this, you can always shape people's behavior by changing the context and managing their social group. That's it. Let us know what you think about it in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube.
Okay, so I just thought that was worth sharing, and when I listened to it, well, firstly, I was reassured because the power of the few. Oh, sorry, let me just. Sorry about that. Should have gone on to the next video. So yeah, I was reassured by the power of the few, because it does kind of mean that we might have a chance of achieving something. I was also encouraged that some of our conversations we'd already started looking at, what's a sticky message, what is the message, and is it going to have impact? And I think in some of our meetings we'd also been discussing who were our salespeople potentially. Could we get hold of Greg Wallace, Sir Digby Jones, Vince Cable, or someone like that to help sort of promote the message? But I also felt a little bit challenged, trying to think, well, what could my role be in this? Because I'm certainly not a salesperson. I'm not extrovert enough or charismatic enough to be a salesperson. Am I a connector? Well, I guess I'm here with you guys, but I don't have a big network, and certainly not in government, which is where I think we need it for what we're trying to achieve. And am I a maven? Well, I wouldn't claim to be a countrywide expert in anything, but I suppose if there's one thing that I have a passion for, it's change management, which is why I volunteered for tonight and share the thing. So yeah, that was really my reflections on it, but it also raised some questions for me as well, in terms of, if we're trying to promote change, who do we actually want to do something different, and what is it that we want them to do differently? And I'm not sure we are clear on that. So yeah, those are the questions I wanted to throw out to the group, and hopefully that was stimulating some conversation.
Well, thank you, John. I very much appreciate you doing that. I realized halfway through that Peter Roos, first time, you probably didn't know what the hell we were talking about there. And Stephen McCabe has just joined us. And because Stephen and I had a conversation this morning, actually, which I did describe what we're up to. But for Peter's benefit, very, very quickly, when Manufacturing TV relaunched about 4 weeks ago, I've always felt that a business that has real purpose is a business that has a better chance of achieving its core goals, but maybe also achieving some change in the process. A dear friend of mine suggested I go after I've forgotten the name of the people who came up with the idea of the big, hairy, audacious goal. And the one I eventually came up with after some help from members of this group was to help me now. What was it? To change government policy to make manufacturing a central pillar of economic planning, something like that. Now, Stephen McCabe, who's just joined us, is a member of Parliament. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself very quickly so people get the context of who you are and why we met today?
Firstly, can everyone hear me? Yep, great. Okay. Firstly, just to say, I'm not the member of Parliament, so that you can't blame me for anything. It wasn't me. It's strange enough. Steve McCabe actually used to be an MP for Hall Green, where I live in Birmingham, which caused all sorts of confusion. I'm actually an academic. I've been at Birmingham City University for since it was a polytechnic back in the late 80s. So I come from a city that of course was dominated and of course known for for manufacturing. Indeed, my mother worked for Lucas's. My dad at one point worked for Longbridge, or at Longbridge, so I know a lot about manufacturing, know a lot of people in the business. And dare I say, my PhD way back in the early 90s was about the whole aspect of quality management. So I'm very comfortable with that. And just to actually elaborate, that the reason I was talking to Nick earlier on is that I'm working with another colleague on a book on green manufacturing, or the green economy, and then a subsequent book on green manufacturing. So that's where we're at the moment. So any ideas that people may have about how to get the message across to people would be more than welcome. I hope that helps, Nick. I'm sorry, I didn't realise you thought I was a member of Parliament.
Well, no, I have to say, okay, this is perhaps why one could get too busy for one's own good. When Julian, because Julian Costley is the glue in all this, and Julian's going to be joining us in 15 minutes or so. Julian is invested in a company called Bite Size Books that Vince Cable, David Bailey, John Mills, Stephen and Beverly Nielsen, who's working with Stephen on this project. And when I said in my mission statement that I shared with you today, I actually mentioned the idea of putting together a book, because a book, for some reason, even though it's a dead tree product, is very, very powerful when it comes to getting news editors and program producers and all that to invite people in for a chat. Anyway, Julian mentioned Stephen's name. I think Julian actually said you were an MP. I think he was confused as well, Steve. And so I looked up Stephen McCabe, and of course my mind should have clicked, because the gentleman I looked up on the website You look nothing like him.
That's
And
true.
I never thought, you know, the penny did not drop. I mean, yeah, there we go. So I apologize, everybody. This man's not an MP. He's a complete imposter. He's just an academic.
It's probably going to be more useful having an academic than a politician, Nick.
We still love you, Nick. It's all right.
Anyway, sorry.
I was only going to say, after the last week, who'd want to be an MP?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But you get the idea. It's a very interesting project that Stephen and Beverly are working on, and it has relevance to our discussion today. And having sort of taken this long diversion to introduce Stephen, I think I took it justifiably, because I think it's a very important thing that's going on. We had a long discussion this morning about the publishing project that he and Beverly are embarked on, and there may very well be some input. I mentioned Richard to you, Stephen. That's Richard Hagan on this call. Is from Crystal Shores, just won the Queen's Award for Civility. So it would be a very powerful, person, witness, if you like, for the witness of the prosecution. But I'd like to pass back to John. And John, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take the ball out of your hands quite so abruptly, but I thought it was important to introduce Stephen and also just let Peter know what the hell was going on first time he joins us. And we're all talking about a subject of which he is unaware. So John, can I just pass back to you, not to lead the conversation, but maybe just to provoke a comments, or if anybody has any comments, would they like to put their hand up and use the raise hand thingy, so that we can start a discussion around some of the things that John was talking about how we become more, we have a stickier message, who are our salespeople, mavens or connectors, and how do we get this message viral? Because manufacturers have been talking for so long about need to be seen, need to be heard, need to be valued by the government, and if nothing ever happens, if anything, it gets worse. What, the end of the industrial strategy, etc., etc. Michael, were you applauding us or were you raising your hand?
I was doing both, actually, whichever. Observation, unless anybody else wants to jump in, I'm sure they will. John, you're making the point that what we want to do is find out people, tell people what we want them to do. And that's the sticky bit. If we can tell them enough about what we want them to do, basically they'll do it. Could we turn it the other way around and find out what is it that they want us to do? Do they want us to do? We've got the problem, and maybe we can fix it. If we can find out what it is, then they'll buy it. But move away from sales into helping people buy. Just, looking at the question from another point of view, get into the pillar of manufacturing later on, but it comes up, doesn't it? I just wonder, how long are we going to wait for these guys to become pillars of manufacturing in government? And, anyway, enough.
I suppose my reflections on this was the BHAG, says that we want politicians to behave differently. We want them to put manufacturing as a central plank of the economic policy. But in order to do that, who else do we want to do something differently? Because as Nick says, we've been trying for years to try and get this. So how are we going to get that? Is it that we want manufacturers to do something differently? And if so, what is it? Is it that we want some other stakeholders somewhere in this piece to do something differently? Or is it just the politicians we want to change? And if it is, that's fine. But then we need to have a plan, an approach, some lobbying, or some ways of influencing these politicians to do something differently.
If I can just revert to something I've laid a lot more emphasis on in an earlier iteration of this mission statement, which was about creating a single or as unified a voice as possible. Stephen, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a multiplicity of voices in our sector. A great many of them are membership organizations, professional associations, trade associations, they all have their own rows to hoe. It's not quite as simple as suggesting that they are that they're all focused on bettering the cause of manufacturing. In many cases, they're looking out to better the cause of their bottom line. I don't mean that rudely, it's just a statement of fact. Now, I initially started off with the idea of maybe trying to unify these voices on the basis of a premise, an assumed premise, which is that we should all want the same thing. And then I rode back from that thinking, well, I'm not entirely certain that I'd be welcome with open arms with a message like that, because who knows, maybe they don't want that kind, maybe they don't share that, and we'd have to do a heck of a lot of research and networking to find out. That's when Julian sort of planted the idea in my head that actually, and also a previous conversation we'd had about doing some television, getting Channel 5 or Channel 4 to commission something. That's when Julian's idea of a book, and this is before I met Stephen, this is a book from, if you like, let's call it for the sake of argument, the Kaizen Central book, the KC book, really attracted me, because I thought that if you could do that, that would make a lot of noise, or we hope it would make some noise. Then you could do some TV around it, that would definitely make a lot of noise. And then eventually what you'd be doing is giving these organizations, they'd be saying, well, actually there's a bandwagon is being formed here, and I think we need to be on it. So in other words, you don't ask them to join, you give them actually little choice but to join you. And that's really where my thinking is at the moment. And Mike, I hope that sort of aligns a little bit, or informs what you were just saying about how we can actually make some of this happen, about wanting people to buy from us rather than telling them that for our own good they've got to do something. And I've never thought that is a hugely compelling argument. Who's got some thoughts? Hands up. Alison, good evening.
Hi. Just from and really this is not even a US perspective, this is just an observation from my psychology undergraduate degree. With my growing up, when I was a kid, I wanted my own phone line in my bedroom. And my father said to my mother, there's no way that kid is getting her own line because she doesn't need one. I didn't have one growing up, therefore she doesn't need it. And over the course of a couple of years, Mom made it his idea to give me a phone line. So I learned early on that sometimes you have to make things other people's ideas in order for them to come around to something. And I see some value in parts of these pieces of the conversation that we're already having on how do we find out what it is somebody else wants, and then we can put the pieces together and present it to them, give them options, give them the perhaps a bit false notion of choice, but give them options. What is it that you want? Do you want this or this? And honestly, in the manufacturing world, you would be willing to accept either. But for them to give you their option, now you already know their motive, what they're driven by. So I think that there's some value in that.
But I suppose my question remains, who are the them? Who are the them that we're talking about? Is it politicians? Is it customers? Is it the consumers of what manufacturing makes? I'm still a little bit confused about who them are.
I think you keep breaking it down. So in the US, theoretically, it's the constituents that put the bug in the politicians' ears that they're representing. So then it's like, okay, now let's go further down. Who are the constituents? Maybe in a certain area of town, education is a really big deal. Or maybe in a certain part of town, an airport or an aviation facility is a really big deal. So, okay, now let's drill down to those people. Who has the bug in those politicians' ears already? And how can we help them connect the dots to see what it is that we have something that they need, and basically connect the dots for them. But again, giving them a choice of saying, I really liked what someone had said earlier with, find out from them, what is it you want? And then you lead the horse to water.
You make an excellent point, Alison, and it reflects something I wrote last year in the autumn, I think, about local manufacturing collectives, if you like. They already exist. I mean, Graham Cooper and the good folk in Leeds have got a very, very powerful grouping. They run the Leeds Manufacturing Festival from it as a result. And Plymouth has got, and they're all over the place. Roy would tell us that the Solent has got a very good, local organization. But, as always, they're involved in local issues, but they are probably as good at getting the ear of the local MP as ever. And of course, if it's quite a prominent local MP, I mean, in the Solent, they've got Penny Mordaunt, who's quite a powerful. I think she's a minister nowadays, but she's very good. But it needs more. It also needs some kind of not unified message. That's a bit crass, but just some kind of effort to communicate with them and say this is what we're doing. And maybe when they're talking to their MP, if they agree with us, maybe that's something they'd like to join in too. But I think it does involve politicians, obviously, because that's why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, why do people lobby Parliament or government? Because that's where the power is. And I think that inevitably becomes a question of making noise as well as more finely sharpened approaches. But we have got friends, we have got advocates. I mean, Jürgen is very, very good. I mean, I was hoping he was going to be here tonight. He couldn't make it. Others, we've got good friends out there. It's just a question of perhaps, creating a more detailed plan / manifesto and doing something beyond that. But it does, I think it's entirely correct what John said today, that we need to identify among us, somebody to wear the salesman hat, somebody to wear the maven hat, somebody to be the connector hat. And I think that we don't have to do this tonight. I'm not suggesting that for 1 second, but I think that it's important to go away and think about, and somebody who's much cleverer than me, because I'm organizationally, I'm pigpen and peanuts. It needs somebody who's got a better brain than I at pulling, plans together. But nobody has to do all the heavy lifting on their own. It's just a question of co-opting and volunteering, and working out what it is precisely we're trying to say. Stephen Bard, were you applauding or did you have your hand up? I never quite know whether it's yellow for.
We need to get another symbol on this Zoom screen, don't we? But rather like Michael, I was doing both. Just simply an observation, really. I mean, one of the things I love about this group is that it's a bunch of people who actually know stuff about manufacturing and are prepared to share their views and be open to challenge. And that makes a really entertaining hour and a really valuable hour. And it's extended when we get people like Vince Cable and others, Jürgen and so forth on. And I think that's a key thing that the market is missing, really, a source of truth, people who are actually prepared to put themselves on the line, talk about their particular experience of problems and solutions, and then open it up to others who also have perspectives, perhaps quite specific ones. That's a really good thing to do. But it's a grassroots approach rather than what I see in the BHAG paper, which is much more of a top-down, let's take over the world kind of viewpoint. I just wonder if there might be a time for a bit more pragmatism.
Well, you know me, Rome wasn't built in a day, but he conquered it in two. That's a good point, Stephen. It needs to be a little less didactic, perhaps. Lee, you had your hand up. You took it down again. Once up, you can't take it down. And you mute. Switch on your microphone, sir.
Here we go. Can you hear me now? Interesting as ever from this amazing group of people, and I think John is right. But subconsciously, I think we're already starting to do it. I myself was inspired by Alison, similarly to what Richard was doing, but also Angela Lawler, which sowed a few seeds. And as Steve was saying just now, we need to get off our asses and start doing something different and talking about it. And I've decided to do that. So I'll be sharing a press release on Monday because I'm going to be holding a manufacturing festival. And what Alison's written there about making noise and being different. I know a manufacturer of guitars. I know a local band called the Faux Fighters. So I want to hold a little festival at our place with suppliers, and then in the evening have a big a party, shall we call it, of networking, and just get people talking and creating noise and being completely different. That's what we need to be. And it comes back to the point of education. So if we can inspire 9 and 10-year-olds in there before they move up to the senior schools, their secondary education, if we can also start inspiring 15 and 16-year-olds before they move on to college or university. So I don't want it to be about MCNC. So already I've been offered an introduction to the CEO of Aerial Motors, so we can get an Aerial Atom there. I've been offered 2 other hill climb sports cars, jet-powered surfboards, backpacks. We need something there that the kids can go, wow, look at that, how sexy is this? And making noise. So I'm going to try and make as much noise as I possibly can. And you mentioned news people, so we know for a fact that the motley crew of the Hammonds, the Mays, and the Clarksons are very passionate about UK manufacturing. We need a loudmouth Clarkson to come on and look at how fantastic is this? The kids can do A, B, and C and make this, whatever it might be. So we need to start inspiring companies and businesses to making noise at a ground roots level, like Alison was alluded to. So when their kids start nagging them about colleges and lack of placements, they then can start nagging at their politicians. And it goes back to the reason I've thought of this was Paul Stead's presentation about design and sales. So I took it all the way back to the beginning. And that's where we need to be at, is let's start at the beginning. Let's start inspiring the youngsters. Let's start making noise and make fun of it as well, because we make some bloody amazing things in this country. We really, really do. Anyway, over to you, Nick.
Well, thank you, Lee. I've signed up to go along. I think it was the promise of the party that dragged me along in the end, wasn't it, Lee? That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. Graham.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Graham, what are you?
I just think myself, I've worked in manufacturing for 40 years, so I'm completely sold on manufacturing is the most important activity in the world, and I feel in a kindred group of spirits here. And I support the BHAG because I think the government needs to realise, and some of the text you've written, Nick, about the stupidity of, if you marry the babysitter, GDP goes down, the non-economic activity that's valued, whereas in manufacturing there's real value created. We've heard Lee talk about his components, and he's turning a lump of steel into something really valuable by applying precision work to it. And in one way or another, that's what we're all about. And you need politicians to get that, to get how important it is at a fundamental level. Otherwise, they'll never pass the policies to get the school curriculums right and to do everything else that we need them to do. So that's why I really like the idea of going after the politicians. And maybe just a thought is what's going to be important to this government in the next general election is this so-called red wall, which is the seats that they managed to win, which mainly are in traditional manufacturing areas. And that might be something that you can tweak a politician's conscience with.
That's a very interesting point. I hadn't sort of thought that actually there is an area of, I wouldn't say political vulnerability, but maybe there's a window of opportunity, if I can steal the name of my own paper. Evening, Julian. Your name has been bandied around many times this evening. And I'd introduce Stephen McCabe as an MP because I think that's how you introduced him.
Steve, hi.
So
you haven't promised me buying everyone a round of drinks or anything like that, have you? Or maybe you have. Everyone's gone quiet.
Well, Steve Murphy, you are next.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up the area of productivity, and I'd like to, if I can, to bring Steve McCabe in and sort of ask him to come in, because this area of productivity is very much the hard yards. So to my mind, there's one big area where we always seem to be a step behind our continental cousins and other people, is in the area of productivity. And some of that stems back straightforward to what falls into quality. So what I wanted to know is Steve could give us some insights into his PhD work and work he's done into maybe how the quality of the quality of our manufacturing compares to the quality. And what I mean by this is that not whether we've got a great product, not whether it's a Rolls Royce, but whether in the act of manufacturing we've minimized variation. So we've minimized variation in cycle time, we've minimized variation in scrap, we've minimized variation in defects that we're sending out the door, whether it's defects in a bolt or defects in a car. We've minimized the cycle time that it takes us to bring put new technologies within our production lines. These are the basic criteria which world-class manufacturing, the ability to manufacture, is measured against. And we always seem to be like a step or so behind. So I wanted to ask Steve, did he have, I don't know what his PhD's in, but did he have any insights in how like these underlying skills were sitting in the UK, maybe compared to Europe, compared to America?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, I've certainly written extensively about the economy because that's one of the, sort of the other strings to my bow. And I've done a lot of work on this, and I mean the thing we talk about the economy no longer being one that's dominated by manufacturing. That is for sure. Certainly up to the sort of the early 1980s, and of course we all know what happened then. Manufacturing took a bit of a tumble, to say the least. But manufacturing has been, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, an area of sort of incredible sort of renaissance in many different ways. And indeed, the value of goods produced now is comparable to back then, but of course with a sort of about a third of the workforce. So of course therein lies the sort of one of the issues. I mean, and productivity in general is seen to be sort of very poor, probably because of course of the sort of the poor capital investment by many, though not all, companies. And of course that is also the thing in the likes of sort of Germany is always a great comparator, as I'm sure you're all well aware. A much different relationship. I mean, what I would say in very general terms is the governments have always been very poor in recognizing, understanding the sort of the value of this. And of course, as we sort of know, and as I mentioned at the outset, I come from a sort of an area of the country which was heavily dominated by the sort of heavy manufacturing. But I mean, I kid you not, I used to have this as a joke, and it's no longer fun anymore, that when my kids eventually have children, and this is what I used to say about 20 years ago, they'll say to me, "Granddad, what's a factory?" And certainly you don't see as many factories as there used to be. when I was growing up. Now, of course, is that a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, because of course it means a lot of the sort of the poor engineering jobs have disappeared. But of course, that there is always this problem. Of course, you put capital investment in, and you don't necessarily need people to carry out the sort of jobs. And indeed, I can't remember who it was. That was Stephen Barn. Forgive me if I'm incorrect, or maybe it was Lee who mentioned, of course, the sort of the vulnerability of the sort of the red wall seats, and that is for sure, because of course, as we sort of know, in terms of becoming greener in terms of manufacturing, it's going to really impact upon the sort of the areas that have already lost a number of jobs in the last 30 years or so, and of course, as we sort of move to a sort of greener economy, then it has the sort of potential, as also combined with sort of autonomous intelligence, to have a big problem in terms of employment. I mean, I'm really conscious, Stephen, coming back to your original question, productivity, it's such a mixed bag. And of course, the thing is, once you actually start to sort of look at the different sectors, some are really good, some are really problematic. And of course, as we know, and I'll shut up now, that has been exposed during the pandemic, when you close your economy, which is, essentially 80% service sector, then you're bound to have a big hit. So, any rebalancing has got to sort of to include much more sort of, and I use the word deliberately, obsession with manufacturing, and I think that's been missing by the government for the last 20, 30 years.
Stephen, sorry, can I jump in, just ask for a bit of clarity there? Is it your contention that a more a greener, more sustainable, certainly process or drive to process net zero manufacturing, together with greater reliance on automation and increasing use of AI-driven decision making, will reduce the number of jobs? Is that your contention? Because I think you find members of this group would suggest actually that when you do introduce a lot of those things, the opportunity for jobs goes up. I'm just intrigued to know whether I got you right there.
Well, it's a really difficult one, and many of the sort of the reports I've read have talked about the sort of the real danger that this industrial revolution, or this phase or next phase of sort of the revolution in industry, it has the potential to reduce jobs that were sort of, again, I think it'll be sort of the white collar functions in particular, whereas of course manufacturing took the hit in the sort of the early 80s. But there is no doubt that sort of that some jobs will be lost. But there is also the great potential, and I'm trying to think of who it was that produced a report last week, and it's gone straight on my mind. And they were talking about the sort of the potential for 1 million new jobs to be created. But of course, the trouble is that requires a lot of pump priming at the outset. So we're on the sort of the precipice. And the difficulty is, if we don't do it in this country, others will do it elsewhere. And of course, again, as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, we're a consumer-led economy, and the government are very happy to go along with that, because that keeps the sort of the wheels flying, as it were, or the sort of the money circulating in the system. But of course, it's no good if all we do is buy goods from sort of from the Far East or wherever that they come from. We've got to make it here, because of course that's where the sort of the wealth will be kept. Again, I'm a great believer in the circular economy.
Yeah, that thing about value, price versus value. The government counts a pound spent in Poundland the same as it does a pound spent at Airbus. Graham.
Sorry, I was just going to make the point that, of course, that the most productive part of the sort of the UK, or the most dynamic part of this of the economy, is the City of London. Well, say no more. So.
Yeah, I got the sarcasm. Thank you. I just go. Sorry, Graham.
I just want to make a comment on the productivity gap. I listen, when it's on, to the wonderful Radio 4 programme, More or Less, where they look into facts and figures. And I can recall distinctly them looking at productivity. And part of it, not all of it, but part of it's in the definition. In the UK, they calculate productivity off as a national statistics based on the hours of work and the GDP divided by the hours of work. In France, they take the hours of work and they subtract from the hours of work holidays, and they subtract from the hours of work sickness absence, and they subtract also the hours of work shrink while the GDP stays the same. So you end up being more productive. That doesn't explain everything, but it's certainly part of the thing. We have a habit in this country of measuring things totally honestly, and not every country in the world measures it the same way.
Yeah, I would bow to others' experience because you know I'm not a manufacturer and haven't been in manufacturing. I suspect that Stephen Barr, if I can, pardon me, ask you, is it not true that because we have a very long tail of SME or S-size manufacturers in this country, that there does tend to be a bias against productivity because they simply don't have the critical mass to achieve it?
It's certainly borne out by the statistics. Another factor related to that is that in other, well, particularly in Germany, and I think also to an extent in the US, it'd be interesting to get Alison's view, you get much more connectivity in supply chains. So supply chains work collaboratively together in other countries more than they do in the UK. So that's another factor. It's quite a complex picture though.
Yeah,
well, that in itself is a huge insight, isn't it? Maybe that's something that we could sort of build into the BHEC somehow, is being more collaborative in our own supply chains.
I think there are initiatives. There are initiatives, I think, out there. I can't quite identify where I read it. Alison, is that a fair characterization of what goes on? Do you think that you have a more connected supply chain, dare I use the word ecosystem?
I think so. I'm getting the impression from hearing from you all that yours is a little bit more disjointed. But I think the added, I guess, benefit, some days I don't think it is, but benefit is that there are different organizations and initiatives that tout certain frameworks that ultimately all speak to each other. So for NIST, for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've got, or Information Standards and Technology, they have a new thing coming out with supply chain risk management. So SCRM is going to be a really big deal in the manufacturing space in the years to come. And I think that the manufacturing piece is obviously very important to that. So part of our grief in manufacturing, I think many of you will attest and agree to this, is that manufacturing connotates to some people dark, dirty, dingy, yucky, old, manual mills. Not manufacturing is new, and there's technology involved, and so it's about the marketing, truly about that word. And perhaps by changing it and adopting some of these different frameworks that organizations are starting to embrace, like supply chain risk management, things like that, where manufacturing is a piece of that puzzle, maybe that would help the cause too. But I think that's kind of where a good thing that the US does is they all kind of start using the same words, and then all of a sudden there's more overlap.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, NIST, I think, did you say that's the National Institute for Science and Technology?
National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's with the U.S. Department of Commerce.
Yeah, I think that one thing the U.S. does really, really well, where I lived in Bethesda, Maryland, it was the headquarters of NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and they've got similar sort of national institutes like that, and they're federally funded. They're not self-sufficient. They're federally funded, and they do a great job of setting standards and driving change. And I remember just however many weeks ago it was that the industrial strategy was binned. Well, not long before that, there was a I wouldn't say a movement, but there was suggestions that the Industrial Strategy Council, which in fact was binned, should be actually go the other way, should be upgraded and given statutory status, so that it actually had the power to manage industrial strategy and policy. Well, not policy, but strategy. And it was, I think that's why when it went harshly into reverse, I think there was a kind of shock factor because people thought it was going the other direction. But I admire the United States for having that kind of driving forces who can lead on things like that. And again, it comes down to the same old we got in this country: too many different fingers and too many different pies. It's very difficult to actually know the way forward without taking on a lot of vested interests who are a lot bigger than we are. Who else has got some thoughts? We're into the last 10 minutes, so please let's have some thoughts from people who haven't been watching some of this. I'd love to get some reaction. Yeah, Peter, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for allowing me into the group. I find it very interesting, sort of from the sideline now. I've been in manufacturing my life, originally in South Africa for about 30 years and then came to England 20 years ago, and mostly in motorsport environment, and worked at Ricardo and then the last 9 years at Mercedes F1 team. And it's quite fascinating to hear everybody having the similar frustration that we all seem to have. We know how good we are. We know we've got the people, we know we've got the talents, but we don't seem to get the respect, and the attitude out there seems to be quite at a very low against engineers, particularly manufacturing engineering. My experience working directly with Germany a lot was quite interesting. So when you get there as a manufacturing engineer, you are incredibly highly respected. When you get back here, you just, another Joe Bloggs. And I always found that very intriguing. Even though we do all the major development work for Mercedes in a particular area, and in Formula One, and especially on turbos. So our regard in the industry over there is extremely high for what we do, but our regard over here, especially on the political side, is very limited. And I share the frustration with everybody, and that is one of the reasons why I thought, I'll join the group and see if I can find some synergies that we can go forward. So just the last comment, I think it is from the original video, there was one that said salesman, and most engineers, in my experience, are really crap at that. we can't sell ourselves. We've got no passion when we talk to each other, but when you get in a group or in a pub or anywhere, I don't hear people talk about engineering. I always tell all my engineering friends, you're the most boring people on the planet. We need to change that attitude so that people want to talk to us. They want to hear what we say. And, it's very simple. You look at America, you get an Elon Musk, look what he's doing. And it's all about, yes, of course, there's technology, etc., but it's all about attitude and the vibe that they create compared to, say, a General Motors. One of our problems here, I think, is we've got everything in place. We just need to try and get that next step and sell ourselves better. And I think most of you guys, we're all working on it. So I'm keen to get further involved with it.
Peter, did you see the same in Germany? Is it also that the salesmen, that the engineers can't sell themselves in Germany, or are they better at it in Germany?
They are very much better at it in Germany because of the fact of their status within society is a much higher status. So they talk much more out of a commanding position than what we would do here. Engineers over here would normally stand back. They can voice their opinion on a technical issue and, like we do, productivity, quality of work, etc., all of those things. But when we have to talk in a more expensive environment, which is specifically the political world, we're not very good at it. Well, sorry, my experience are that we're not very good at it.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Got a couple of hands raised. That's 6 minutes. Andy, good evening to you. Lovely to hear from you. Can't see you, but lovely to hear from you.
Yeah. Yeah, apologies, guys. I've got something going on in the background, so I've remained semi-anonymous tonight. Just to put a little bit of a spin on things, I think to some extent, if one good thing's come out of the pandemic, it's that we in the West have suddenly woken up and gone, hang on, why are we dragging things in from China? So I think there is an amount of momentum, helped obviously as well by a large container ship wedging itself in the Suez Canal. But people, certainly businesses that I see, and I've been banging on about this for several years, many, almost decades, that the price is not the cost. And especially if we're going to talk lean and green, then let's talk green in terms of not bringing container loads full of suspect quality around from the other side of the world. Let's talk about what lean and green really means. Shortening your supply chain, making your operations efficient. And as somebody said earlier, getting the basics right. We've got low defects. We've got constant product. We know what we're marketing. The salesman can go out and do it. They can go and sell on our behalf, knowing that we've got quality. And if I'm honest, you don't always get that when you're buying products halfway around the world, and there's a time difference, and the quality isn't maybe what it should be. Feel free to shoot me down on it, but I think we do have an opportunity with lean and green.
Yeah, I remember one of the really interesting things. I was way back at this was at the very start of the pandemic. A chum of mine and somebody that you know, I'm sure a lot of you know, Rob Marchant from Marchant Kane. He was talking about the fact that there's a possibility for reshoring a lot of work, because a lot of OEMs actually can. It's something to do with carbon credits, and I'm not clever to understand how carbon credits work, but actually, even though there may be a bit of a price premium from buying locally, they can actually make it work by using the carbon credits to offset the cost of doing it. Ewan, good evening to you. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, good evening, and sorry I was late, but so apologies if this point's already been made, but actually it's a nice segue just to follow on from Andy. It was really encouraging. I happened to be listening to Radio 4 a couple of mornings ago, and they had the chair of what they've now called the COVID Recovery Commission, John Allen, being interviewed, and he's the ex-chair of Tesco's. And he was talking about building back together, and was actually specifically mentioned manufacturing as a key focus of an industry and a sector that we need to invest in and spend more time supporting as a means of basically, leveling up. And so I was sort of encouraged, if we're talking about, trying to push an open door, or at least, try and find a door that's slightly ajar. A lot of the language he was using is language that I haven't heard being used on Radio 4 practically ever. And in terms of, actually sort of that support, I was very encouraged by that. So part of the manifesto, I think, we ought to be adding him and them as a potential source of sponsors or whatever else it is that you've been discussing.
That's a really good idea, Ewan. Thank you. No, that's terrific, because again, it's a brand new body. It's obviously it's got a sharpened spear purpose, and if we can go and help them sharpen it, not a bad idea at all. Just like to welcome Beverly, who's joined us. I know that you've been on significant other meetings this afternoon, Beverly, but I'm glad you could join us even for a few minutes, and hope you'll join us again sometime, or anytime you like, please. There you got the link. It's
Thanks so much.
You're in, so you're stuck. You're done.
Thank you.
Beverly is working with Stephen McCabe and with Julian on these books on the green economy and green manufacturing. And she was part of the conversation I had earlier today with Julian. We're out of time, and I always promise that people can get to their supper and their bottle of vintage claret as soon as possible after 7 o'clock. So perhaps we can have another chat another time on Thursday, 6 p.m. Stick it in your diary. Please join us anytime you like. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. John, I do hate Zoom. I'm looking over there and you're over there. Never mind. I'll look at the camera. John, thank you so much for taking the initiative on this. You really sparked some thinking. And Melissa, I called her Melissa again. Alison. Alison. I called you Melissa for this. I get a name
I'm
change.
going to go have my name legally changed.
We all want to know who Melissa was,
Nick. Joining us again.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. Yeah, who's Melissa?
My evil twin.
Right. I called Stephen an MP earlier. I'm blaming Julian for that.
I think you might have gotten into the Malbec earlier.
No, Lee's been on the Carling. He hasn't got the Malbec yet. But no, Alison, thank you as always for bringing us the perspective from the USA. And as always, you bring so much wisdom and insight, and I really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for being here. Stephen McCabe, academic rather than MP. Thank you for joining us. Beverly, good to see you. And do please, both of you, any old time, I'll add your name, I'll add your emails to the round robins that I put out on Thursday mornings. And then if we're discussing something that's obviously a bit esoteric manufacturing wise, well, it's not of any interest, but if it strikes a chord, do join us any old time you like. I shall stop rambling. I shall say thank you, everybody. Thank you for being with us as always. It's been a great pleasure.